I would like to say good day to daytime viewers and listeners, and good evening to evening time viewers and listeners of this broadcast. A couple of weeks into my special prosecutor post, I entered the store at the Rodney Bay Mall to purchase some clothing. I took my selected clothes to the cashier for payment. The cashier asked, "Is that going to be duty paid or duty free?" I replied, "Duty paid." The cashier then said to me, "I can let you have them duty free, but you will have to compensate me. Only don't insult me with a $5. I replied, "That's government money, and government needs its money. I will have the clothes duty paid." Standing right next to the cashier was a co-worker who I presumed to be the supervisor. The person was privy to the conversation, but made no comment. Was this silence tacit assent to the cashier's way of doing business? The cashier did not know me, yet attempted to draw me into a conspiracy to defraud the government of St. Lucia. What an orientation to my new job as special prosecutor. Since taking up my appointment as special prosecutor under the Special Prosecutor Act of 2022, persons have approached me and engaged me, trying to find out in different ways what I am in fact doing and how close I was in charging some public officer or official for corruption. Some have asked, quote, "How is your work going?" Others, quote, "It's not an easy job. Good luck." Still others, "Some of those guys must face jail for their corruption." Some who seem to know more than I do have pontificated, "There is too much corruption in the system. Somebody must answer." One said to me, quote, "I personally have helpful information on some corrupt officials," unquote. Some in seeming frustration say, "What is the government doing? It is time for them to bring the corrupt officials to justice." I have a patented way of deflecting this vividly expressed interest by saying something along the lines, "I am all about the facts and the law. Rumors will not do. Not everything that looks like corruption is corruption. But I'm doing what I need to do in the circumstances. It's not an easy thing. My main concern is the facts and the law." These questions and comments, though, indicate that you have a legitimate concern about public corruption and that you want to see some form of legal action taken against the alleged perpetrators. I hope by this broadcast to correct the perception of many that corruption in the public service is widespread, and to allay your fears that very little, if anything, is being done about it, especially where, in fact, it occurs. This broadcast, therefore, seeks to accomplish 4 objectives. 1, I will provide you with a brief overview of the history of the St. Lucia government's anti-corruption policy and actions. 2, I will remind you of some of the laws the government has enacted and that are the handmaids of the government's anti-corruption policy and program, and which, of course, all came into existence before the Special Prosecutor Act. Thirdly, I will provide you with the definition of certain expressions or words under the Act. These are words of expressions we often use when discussing public corruption. This definition, I hope, will enable us to communicate the same meaning to each other when talking about public corruption. Fourthly and lastly, I will briefly address what the office has accomplished and is presently working on, make you aware of the complexity of investigating and prosecuting public corruption, and of your indispensable role in the anti-corruption crusade, and to solicit your invaluable assistance in the process. Now, for the government's anti-corruption policy and action. Did you know that the government has an anti-corruption policy? The creation of the post of Special Prosecutor is not the government of St. Lucia reflexive response to the alleged rumors among many persons of corruption among public officers and officials. The fact is, the government of St. Lucia has been proactive in its anti-corruption stance. Successive governments over the years have pursued an anti-corruption policy that has borne fruit. The very constitution that forms the foundation and crown of the edifice of government is inherently anti-corruption focused. Parliament is charged with making laws for the peace and good government of St. Lucia. Corruption is not a building block of good government. The checks and balances established in setting up the three main branches of government: legislative, executive, and judiciary, and the provisions in the Constitution establishing various commissions for appointment and discipline of public officers are all geared to promoting integrity in the operation of the machinery of government. Corruption thrives where integrity has been relegated to the back burner. The legislature makes laws for the government of St. Lucia. Good government is really the effective quantitative infrastructure for delivering the public goods and services to the governed. Good government may be compared to a good system and network of pipes by Wasco to ensure water reaches the maximum amount of people who depend on the water for quality of life. So, government establishes ministries, departments, and agencies, and situate these at strategic locations where they are accessible to the maximum persons who utilize the public goods and services delivered through these channels. This is good government, but it must be supplemented by good governance, which is the qualitative execution of government's policies by public administrators, managers, and agents to ensure equity and integrity in the distribution of the public good and public services to the people governed. Just as corruption may not be a building block of good government, so too, corruption may not be a part of the fabric of policy decision-making of the government, nor of the administration of these policies, nor of the execution of these policies by management and agencies in the distribution of the public good and public services owed by the government to the citizens. This is of such critical importance that today the expression good governance has become an international lingo in government circles. In fact, international bodies and agencies who assist national government in attaining the economic and social goals of development insist that a government must demonstrate good governance to be eligible for international assistance in pursuing their development goals. How then, you may ask, can you recognize a government characterized by good governance? I am reminded of the adage, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then it is a duck. So let me share with you the World Bank 8 characteristics of good governance. Number 1, participation. That means there is an informed, organized, and impartial participation of the citizens in the government's decision-making process. For example, the government intends to construct a highway on the east side of the island, from Gruzilet to Denry. It will ensure that the citizens living on that side of the island are well informed of its intention and the reasons for that intent, and solicits their input as to how they feel about its intention and what suggestions they have in support or in opposition. This, of course, goes beyond the citizens' participation in a general election where building such a road was an issue and political commitment. Number 2, the rule of law. There must be a fair legal framework that ensures impartiality and the protection of human rights, especially of the most marginalized group. An independent judiciary and incorruptible police force are key. Number 3, transparency. That means easy access to government information regarding its policies and their implementation. It requires a proper government information service that explains the information without a bias or spin. It also deals with fair delivery of services consistent with enforceable rules and regulations. Responsiveness. Timely response to the needs of the citizens. Example, road repairs and other important needs of the citizens. Number 5, consensus-oriented. Seeks and utilize stakeholders' contribution as to kind and time of implementation of policies that serve needs of the community. Number 6, equity and inclusiveness. That means give citizens reasons to feel they have a stake in society and not excluded from its governance. Number 7, effectiveness and efficiency. Meets the needs of society, utilizes society's resources for sustainable development. And 8, accountability. Leaders and administrators and managers are accountable to the people through established legal processes for the stewardship of the society's resources and must face consequences for the breach of the public trust. So how is all good governance related to corruption? Well, here is how an expert in the field puts it, quote, corruption undermines good governance. When corruption exists, it erodes public trust, distorts decision-making, and diverts resources away from essential services. Transparency and accountability are essential components of both good governance and anti-corruption efforts. A transparent government is less likely to engage in corrupt practices. Strong institutions that enforce anti-corruption laws and hold wrongdoers accountable contribute to good governance. That's where I come in as special prosecutor. Public participation in decision-making processes helps prevent corruption by ensuring that citizens have a say in how resources are allocated. In summary, anti-corruption policies are a critical part of good governance as they promote integrity, accountability, and ethical behavior within the government and society. By addressing corruption, government can enhance the overall governance and create a more just and equitable society, unquote. Government of St. Lucia's anti-corruption policy is in large measure informed by international conventions against corruption. Here are the main ones that underlines government's anti-corruption laws. In March of 1966, the Organization of American States adopted the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption, which had two major goals. One, to promote and strengthen the development by each of the states parties of the mechanism needed to prevent, detect, punish, and eradicate corruption. And two, promote, facilitate, and regulate cooperation among the state parties to ensure the effectiveness of measures and actions to prevent, detect, punish, and eradicate corruption in the performance of public duties and acts of corruption specifically related to such performance, unquote. St. Lucia is a party to this convention. On November 15, 2000, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, which came into force on the 29th of September 2003. St. Lucia acceded to this convention in 2011. That is, this convention became part of the domestic laws of St. Lucia by the legislative action of the Parliament of St. Lucia. On June 4, 2001, the Organization of American States adopted the follow-up mechanism for the implementation of the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption to be the instrument whereby states parties' compliance with the goals of the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption may be reviewed and to strengthen cooperation between states in their efforts to combat a common enemy, corruption. On April 4, 2018, St. Lucia became a state party to the follow-up mechanism for the implementation of the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption. The government of St. Lucia, in doing so, reiterated its long-standing adoption of an anti-corruption policy with international scope. The government has placed integrity on the front burner by pursuing an anti-corruption policy. Now, it's not easy to formulate the policy into a mission statement that succinctly and comprehensively captured that policy, but I have for myself summarized and suggested that it may appear and be read as follows, quote, to eradicate or minimize acts of corruption in the management and operations of the public service by means of anti-corruption legislation, education, coordination, and cooperation, to develop a culture of integrity by a focus and emphasis on good governance, and to investigate, prosecute, and punish every incident of public corruption where possible. The government's anti-corruption policy has led it to take concrete actions in the creation of domestic anti-corruption agencies that are regional in scope and reach. There is, first of all, the follow-up mechanism for the implementation of the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption Committee. This is a local anti-corruption agency set up to investigate, prevent, and combat corrupt practices. There is also the National Anti-Money Laundering Oversight Committee. Its name speaks for itself. Then we have the Integrity Commission, conceived by the Constitution of St. Lucia, Section 118, but birthed by the Integrity of Public Life Act, has been established to inter alia receive, examine, and retain declarations of assets and liabilities of persons in public life. That is a fixed list of persons. And receive, investigate, and submit report of inquiry or complaint of corruption by persons in public life to the DPP or AG for prosecution. This agency is part of the government's legislative thrust against corruption when it functions effectively. Let me take this opportunity to urge my fellow persons in public life and fellow PEPs to comply with the law. We must set the example as law-abiding persons. In 2015, the Association of Integrity Commissioners and Anti-Corruption Bodies in the Commonwealth Caribbean was established. It is set up to enhance transparency, promote integrity, and fight corruption through education, cooperation, and coordination. St. Lucia's Integrity Commission is part of this association. Then there is the Financial Intelligence Unit, FIU, created under the Money Laundering Prevention Act. It utilizes a secretariat headed by an appointed director, the CEO of the authority, to receive, analyze, obtain, investigate, and disseminate information which relates to or may relate to proceeds of criminal conduct under the Act or the Proceeds of Crime Act. Besides the anti-corruption international conventions and the anti-corruption domestic agencies, the government utilizes legislation to directly identify corrupt actions and practices and to punish these. Legislation is also used to make it very difficult for corruption to thrive. And if perhaps it does take root, to quickly detect it and uproot it. I will now briefly identify some of the more important laws enacted by the government in this regard. There is the Drug Prevention of Misuse Act. There's also the Proceeds of Crime Act. This act is purposefully concerned with depriving persons of enjoying the benefits they gain from criminal acts or enterprises. Then there is the Money Laundering Prevention Act. This act aims at seizing and forfeiting the products of benefits of criminal activity, especially those that are filtered through financial institutions. Then there is the Public Finance Management Act. And I'm going to dwell on this a little longer. This act provides for the regulation, control, and management of government monies in the Consolidated Fund. This act contains several provisions that, when strictly adhered to and enforced, significantly assist in the prevention of corruption, in the receipt of government revenues, and in the disbursement of monies from the Consolidated Fund. Parliament decides how much money is to be spent on specific macro goods and services for each year. This is the appropriation law, voted for each financial year. This is what the budget debate is all about. Here are some sample provisions of the Public Finance Management Act that are anti-corruption in their effects. Section 70 states, officer making, allowing, or directing unauthorized payment, as well as the officer required to prepare, submit, or check any such payment, are personally responsible for the amount of said payment. Section 72 states, unauthorized payment made as a consequence of an incorrect certificate on a voucher or invoice. The certifying officer is responsible. Section 72 says, responsibility when signing an accounting officer or an officer authorized by him who signs or authorizes a payment instrument certifies the accuracy of every detail set out in the instrument and is responsible for ensuring that the service specified has been satisfactorily delivered, that the prices charged are either according to contract or approved scales or fair and reasonable according to current local rates, that proper authority has been obtained for the expenditure in respect of which payment is made, that computation and costing have been verified and are arithmetically correct, that the person named in the instrument is entitled to receive payment, those stores purchased have been correctly received and put to use or taken on charge. Failure to adhere to these control provisions makes the accounting officer answerable to the inquiry committee. The inquiry committee and its functions are set out on the sections 87 to 98. The Act makes provision for the appointment of an inquiry committee to make inquiry of public officers who violate controls of the financial management system and are referred to it by the Director of Finance for, among other things, failure to collect money owing the government, payment of public money without obtaining proper identification of the pay, signing an incorrect or false certificate on a payment instrument, contravening the Finance Act. Public officers are liable to pay back government money lost through their careless management. Thus, poor management per se is not considered corruption, but is serious enough to elicit restitution. Thus, public officers are made accountable for failing to properly manage the disbursement of government money from the consolidated fund. It is mismanagement that does not amount to fraud, but if left unchecked, would create conditions conducive for corruption to thrive. The inquiry committee, therefore, plays a vital role of checkmate of public corruption in dealing with government finances. But this committee needs to be adequately manned by persons of experience, knowledge, commitment, and integrity if it is to fulfill its mandate. The financial regulations require the Accountant General to be proactive in taking anti-corruption measures in managing public finance. Regulation 4, for instance, says it is his responsibility to exercise control over all officers in his or her department and sub-accountants entrusted with the receipt or payment of public monies, and to take precautions by the maintenance of efficient internal controls and checks, including surprise inspections against the occurrence of fraud, embezzlement, or neglect. Then we have the Public Procurement Act. This act sets out the procedures by which the government enters contracts with private entities as it pursues its goal of increasing the stock of public goods and services. It is the process that may be most conducive to corrupt conduct by public officers and officials, given the very large sums of money that exchange hands at one instance. And so the Act makes specific anti-corruption provision. Section 11 to 22 is key to the process of public procurement, and it is mandated to strive for the highest standards of transparency and equity in executing its function. Even in its definition section, the Act identifies and defines some corrupt conduct. For instance, corrupt practice means giving, conferring, procuring, or promising or offering to give, confer, or procure, or attempt to procure directly or indirectly anything of value to a public officer to influence his or her action in a public procurement procedure or in the execution of a public procurement contract. Fraudulent is given the meaning of a misrepresentation or omission of facts in order to influence a public procurement procedure or contract, or the offering or giving directly or indirectly of improper inducements in order to influence a public procurement procedure or execution of a public procurement contract, including interference in the ability of competent tenders to participate in public procurement procedures, or any other deceptive conduct related to business or professional activities. Misconduct in relation to a tender includes price fixing, breach of confidentiality, a pattern of underpricing, an act of corrupt practice, and any delinquency relating to the responsibilities of the tenderer, that is, the person who has submitted the tender. There is a list of specified offenses under this Act that also carry specified penalties. But there's also a general penalty clause, section 118, that reads, a person who contravenes any provision of this Act, not otherwise specifically provided for, commits an offense and is liable to 8 years and or $20,000. Clearly, the Act most definitely sets parameters to preclude and to punish corruption in the process of procurement of public contracts. When we talk to each other, we make sense and understand each other when the words and expressions we use mean the same thing to each other. So now we will consider some definitions under the Act. My job under the Special Prosecutor Act is to receive, investigate, and prosecute complaints of corrupt conduct and or breach of other provisions of the Act by public officers and officials. I am aware that such a broad mandate to seemingly one individual raises alarm bells to some in the know. But may I assure you that there is a process afoot to rectify the matter. When you witness or suspect or were informed of a case of corruption and you report it to my office, it ought to be a complaint of corrupt conduct as defined by the Special Prosecution Act. And when you identify someone as having acted corruptly, it must be one who is a public officer or public official acting corruptly while performing his functions as a public officer. We all therefore need to be familiar with the meaning the Act has given to the following frequently used expressions: corrupt conduct, undue advantage, public office, public officer, public service, and public official. The Act defines corrupt conduct as means action by a public officer or public official that knowingly achieves for the public officer, public official, or another person an undue advantage. Includes behavior specified in the schedule. When we peruse the schedule to the Act, we find 12 specific kinds of conduct identified as corrupt conduct. Number 1, soliciting or accepting an undue advantage for himself or herself or for another person. 2, performing or refraining from performing his or her public function for the purpose of obtaining an undue advantage for himself or herself or for another. 3, promising, offering, or giving to a person an undue advantage to perform or refrain from performing his or her official function. 4, abusing his or her real or supposed influence to obtain an undue advantage for himself or herself or for another person. 5, misbehavior in public office. 6, misfeasance in public office. 7, using or concealing property or other benefit. 8, offering or granting, directly or indirectly, to another public officer or public official an article, money, or other benefit, being a gift, favor, promise, or advantage to the other public officer, public official, or another, for doing an act or omitting to do an act in the performance of the other public officers or public officials' public function. 9, allowing his or her private interest to conflict with his or her public duty, or improperly influencing his or her conduct in the performance of his or her public duties. 10, offering or granting, directly or indirectly, to a person performing a public function in a foreign state, an article or money or other benefit, being a gift, favor, promise, or advantage in connection with an economic or commercial transaction for an act to be performed or omitted to be performed by that person in performance of that person's public functions. 11, acquiring, directly or indirectly, property or pecuniary resource disproportionate to his or her legitimate sources of income. And 12, instigating, aiding, abetting, or is an accessory after the fact, or participating in a manner in the commission or attempted commission of or conspiring to commit corrupt conduct. The Act goes on to say that for purposes of paragraph 1C, referring to misbehavior in public office, that means the intentional action on or inaction of a public officer or public official in the course of his or her official function, in breach of public trust and without reasonable excuse or justification that causes a reasonable person to conclude that the public officer or public official has abused his or her public office. It goes on to say, in this schedule, a reference to misbehavior in public office is a reference to a criminal action, but a reference to misfeasance in public office is a reference to the civil cause of action. Misbehavior in public office is mainly concerned with the abuse of power or oppressive use of authority that has been legally determined to be criminal in nature, while misfeasance deals with negligent, that is unintentional use of power or authority resulting in harm and loss to a third party. Undue advantage. The Act defines undue advantage to mean a benefit obtained from unlawful or improper actions. Public office is another key word for which we need to have a common definition, including public officer, public service, and public official. It is critical that the corrupt conduct complained of is that of a public officer or public official in the performance of his or her functions. For both public office and public officer, the definition in the Act states it has the meaning assigned under the Constitution of St. Lucia. Section 124 of the Constitution of St. Lucia defines public office and public officer and also public service. Public service is defined as service in a civil capacity of the government. Public office means any office of emolument in the public service. This simply means being a paid civil servant. Public officer means a person holding or acting in any public office. The Act defines public official in the following way. Public official includes a member of parliament or a person having official duties under an enactment or a former public official. This means that all members of the House and Senate are public officials and may be identified in a complaint of corrupt conduct under the Act. So when we talk to each other about corrupt conduct, we will be talking about a person employed by and receiving a salary from the government who is using his office or his power or influence to improperly or unlawfully benefit himself or another person. Or we will be talking about such a public employee who intentionally abuses the public trust in him and causes serious harm or injury to another person, including the government who hired him or her, or who causes such a harm or injury unintentionally. To remove any doubt and to be clear, the special prosecutor under the Act, as it now stands, is concerned with corrupt conduct among civil servants or public officers and officials, and not with corruption among private people, that is, persons who do not belong to the civil service. Now, although there are checks and balances incorporated in these laws to minimize the incidence of corruption in the public service, the timely investigation and prosecution of incidents of corruption have not kept pace with allegations of corruption in the public service. The enactment of the Special Prosecutor Act and the creation of the Special Prosecutor are the logical and inevitable development and extension of the government's anti-corruption policy and actions that ensure and provide the citizenry with good government and good governance that efficiently and equitably deliver to the people the public good and services they desire and are entitled to without the undoing influence of corruption. Keep in mind, and I quote, "Corruption undermines good governance. When corruption exists, it erodes public trust, distorts decision-making, and diverts resources away from essential services," unquote. The public service in the main is managed by competent civil servants with integrity. Hence, the reason the public service is not viewed as a nest of public corruption, despite allegations of corruption. But one bad apple in a barrel of otherwise good apples spells disaster. So too, corruption may be infectious and is corrosive where it occurs, unless it is imminently and effectively removed. The special prosecutor is to complement the good work being done by civil servants with competence and with integrity, and to deal with public corruption where it has or is raising its ugly head. Now, advances in technology have benefited those with honest intent, as well as those with criminal intent in all endeavors of life. Today, corruption among leaders is not easily detected because they know how to use the technology available to hide the ill-gotten gains from detection and the reach of lawful investigation. The smoke of their destructive fire may be visible, but the fire is long extinguished before one gets to the source of the smoke. Early detection is key to early success because it gives the perpetrator little time to hide illegal loot where it may be difficult or impossible to reach. It is not always impossible to reach the ill-gotten gains, but finding it requires concerted and unified effort of people of good will. This is where you need to play your part as patriots of good government and good governance. One reason why you make an allegation of corruption against a public officer is because you rightly feel that public corruption provides one or a couple of people more than their fair share of the goods and services the government needs to distribute to the rest of the population. And for this reason, public corruption, in all its varied shades and colors, is manifestly unfair and illegal and ought not to be tolerated. The office of the special prosecutor, though it must bear the brunt of the burden of investigating and prosecuting corrupt conduct among public officers, would miss the mark if it acts as a lone ranger in search of corrupt conduct by public officers and officials. The office may only initiate an investigation upon credible complaints from those of you who know of a live fire of corrupt conduct, or of one in the process of being lit, or who has knowledge of the arsonists responsible for smoldering corrupt conduct. Unless you share your knowledge with the office of the special prosecutor, you make it more difficult for the anti-corruption efforts of the government to bear tangible and visible fruit where public corrupt conduct has manifested itself. My appeal to you, therefore, my friends, is to invite you to manifest or demonstrate the genuineness of your legitimate concern to prevent and remove corrupt conduct from the public service by cooperating with the Office of the Special Prosecutor and provide it with your information of corrupt conduct of a public officer or official. Your support in this regard will have a huge impact on the degree of success of the Office of the Special Prosecutor fulfilling its mandate under the law. So far, the Office of the Special Prosecutor has received several complaints. Some of them have not merited investigation beyond weighing their merit, which revealed them to be frivolous, and so have been dealt with definitively. A couple required responses from persons against whom the complaints were made, and these responses proved decisive in determining the complaints had no merit, while the other complaints in our possession are under investigation. Now, it is the policy of the Special Prosecutor's Office not to divulge to the wider public the name of a complainant, nor of the public officer against whom a complaint has been made, unless and until investigation reveals evidence sufficient to charge a named public officer, and the public officer is officially charged. In this way, we hope to maintain our fairness and integrity in dealing with complainants and persons against whom complaints of alleged corrupt conduct is made. We promise that in pursuing our mandate, we will treat everyone fairly, respectfully, and with due process, and that working together with you, we may reduce significantly, if not eradicate, the scourge of public corruption. Thank you for listening and sharing your time with me. Be well, be blessed, be inspired.